Part 2, Chapter 6 of Madame Midas. This recording is in the public domain. Madame Midas by Fergus Hume. Part 2, Chapter 6. On Change. Young Australia has a wonderful love for the excitement of gambling. Take him away from the betting ring, and he goes straight to the share market to dabble in gold and silver shares. The great humbug gold mining company is floated on the Melbourne market, a perfect fortune in itself, which influential men are floating in a kind of semi-philanthropic manner to benefit mankind at large, and themselves in particular. Report by competent geologists, rich specimens of the reef exhibited to the confiding public. Company of 50,000 shares at £1 each, 2 shillings on application, 2 shillings on allotment. The balance in calls which influential men solemnly assure confiding public will never be needed. Young Australia sees a chance of making thousands in a week, buys 1,000 shares at 4 shillings, only £200. Shares will rise, and young Australia hopefully looks forward to pocketing 2 or 3,000 by his modest venture of 200. Company floated, shares rising slowly. Young Australia will not sell at a profit, still dazzled by his chimerical thousands. Calls must be made to put up machinery. Shares have a downward tendency. Never mind, there will only be 1 or 2 calls, so stick to shares as parents of possible thousands. Machinery erected, now crushing, 2 or 3 ounces to ton a certainty. Shares have an upward tendency. Washing up takes place, 2 pennyweights to ton. Despair. Shares run down to nothing, and young Australia sees his thousands disappear like snow in the sun. The great humbug reef proves itself worthy of its name, and the company collapses amid the groans of confiding public and secret joy of influential men who have sold at the top price. Vandeloup knew all about this sort of thing, for he had seen it occur over and over again in Ballarat and Melbourne. So many came to the web and never got out alive, yet fresh flies were always to be found. Vandeloup was of a speculative nature himself, and had he been possessed by any surplus cash would, no doubt, have risked it in the jugglery of the share market. But as he had none to spare, he stood back and amused himself with looking at the spider and the fly business which was constantly going on. Sometimes, indeed, the fly got the better of spider number 1, but was unable to keep away from the web, and was sure to fall into the web of spider number 2. Monsieur Vandeloup therefore considered the whole affair as too risky to be gone into without unlimited cash, but now he had a chance of making money. He determined to try his hand at the business. True, he knew that he was in for a swindle, but then he was behind the scenes, and would benefit by the knowledge he had gained. If the question at issue had really been that of getting gold out of the reef and paying dividends with the profits, Gaston would have snapped his fingers scornfully, and held aloof. But this was simply a running up of shares by means of a rich reef being struck. He intended to buy at the present market value, which was 4 shillings, and sell as soon as he could make a good profit, say at £1, so there was not much chance of him losing his money. The shares would probably drop again when the pocket of gold was worked out, but then that would be none of his affair, as he would by that time have sold out and made his pile. Monsieur Vandeloup was a fly who was going straight into the webs of stockbroking spiders. but then he knew as much about this particular web as the spiders themselves. Full of his scheme to make money, Vandeloup started for town to see a broker, first, however, having settled with Mrs Pulchop over Kitty's disappearance. He had found a letter from Kitty in the bedroom, in which she had bidden him good-bye for ever, but this he did not show to Mrs Pulchop, merely stating to that worthy lady that his wife had left him. "And it ain't to be wondered at, the outraged angel," she said to Gaston as he stood at the door, faultlessly dressed, ready to go into town. "The way you treated her were shameful." Gaston shrugged his shoulders, lit a cigarette, and smiled at Mrs Pulchop. "My dear lady," he said blandly, "pray attend to your medicine bottles and leave my domestic affairs alone. You certainly understand the one, but I doubt your ability to come to any conclusion regarding the other." "Fine words don't butter no parsnips," retorted Mrs Pulchop, viciously, "and if Pulchop weren't an Apoller he had a kind heart." "Spare me these domestic stories, please," said Vandeloup, coldly; "they do not interest me in the least. Since my wife," with a sneer, "has gone, I will leave your hospitable roof. I will send for all my property either today or tomorrow, and if you make out your account in the meantime, my messenger will pay it. Good day," and without another word Vandeloup walked slowly down the path, leaving Mrs Pulchop speechless with indignation. He went into town first, to the City of Melbourne Bank, and cashed Meddlechip's cheque for £600. Then, calling a hansom, he drove along to the Hibernian Bank, where he had an account, and paid it into his credit, reserving £10 for his immediate use. Then he re-entered his hansom, and went along to the office of a stockbroker called Polglaze, who was a member of the Bachelors, and in whose hands Vandeloup intended to place his business. Polglaze was a short, stout man, scrupulously neatly dressed, with iron grey hair standing straight up, and a habit of dropping out his words one at a time, so that the listener had to construct quite a little history between each, in order to arrive at their meaning, and the connection they had with one another. "Morning," said Polglaze, letting the salutation fly out of his mouth rapidly, and then closing it again in case any other word might be waiting ready to pop out unknown to him. Vandeloup sat down and stated his business briefly. "I want you to buy me some Magpie Reef shares," he said, leaning on the table. "Many?" dropped out of Polglaze's mouth, and then it shut again with a snap. "Depends on the price," replied Vandeloup with a shrug. "I see in the papers they are 4 shillings." Mr Polglaze took out his share book, and rapidly turned over the leaves, found what he wanted, and nodded. "Oh," said Vandeloup, making a rapid mental calculation, "then buy me 2,500. That will be about £500 worth." Mr Polglaze nodded, then whistled. "Your commission, I presume," said Vandeloup, making another calculation, "will be threepence." "Sixpence," interrupted the stockbroker. "Oh, I thought it was threepence," answered Vandeloup quietly. "However, that does not make any difference to me. Your commission at that rate will be £12 10s." Polglaze nodded again, and sat looking at Vandeloup like a stony mercantile sphinx. "If you will, then, buy me these shares," said Vandeloup, rising, and taking up his gloves and hat, "when am I to come along and see you?" "4," said Polglaze. "Today?" inquired Vandeloup. A nod from the stockbroker. "Very well," said Vandeloup, quietly. "I'll give you a cheque for the amount then. There's nothing more to be said, I believe," and he walked over to the door. "Say," from Polglaze. "Yes," replied Gaston indolently, swinging his stick to and fro. "New?" inquired the stockbroker. "You mean to this sort of thing?" said Vandeloup, looking at him, and receiving a nod in token of acquiescence, added entirely. "Risky," dropped from the Polglaze mouth. "I never knew a gold mine that wasn't," retorted Vandeloup, dryly. "Bad," in an assertive tone, from Polglaze. "This particular mine, I suppose you mean," said Gaston, with a yawn. "Very likely it is. However, I'm willing to take the risk. Good day, see you at 4." And with a careless nod, M. Vandeloup lounged out of the office. He walked along Collins Street, met a few friends, and kept looking out for Kitty. He, however, did not see her, but there was a surprise in store for him, for turning round into Swanston Street, he came across Archie McIntosh. Yes, there he was, with his grim, severe Scotch face, with the white frill round it, and Gaston smiled as he saw the old man, dressed in rigid broadcloth, casting disapproving looks on the pretty girls walking along. "A set of hizies," growled the amiable Archie to himself, "prancing along with their new gewgaws and fine class, like war horses, the daughters of Zion that walk with mincing steps and tinkling ornaments." "How do you do?" said Vandeloup, touching the broadcloth shoulder, upon which McIntosh turned. "Lord save us!" he ejaculated grimly, "it's yon French body. And who's a with ye, laddie? Eh, but you're brawly dressed, my young man," with a disapproving look. "I'm hoping they duds are paid for." "Of course they are," replied Vandeloup gaily. "Do you think I stole them?" "Well, I'll no go say as far as that," remarked Archie cautiously. "Maybe ye've dwelt by the side o' money waters, and flourished. If he can the Scripture, ye'll see God help those what help themselves." "That means you do all the work, and give God the credit," retorted Gaston with a sneer. "I know all about that." "Ah, ye're gang to the pit o' Tophet when ye dee," said Mr McIntosh, who had heard this remark with horror, "and ye'll no be sae ready wi' your tongue there, I'm thinking. But ye are not speering about Mistress Villiers?" "Why, is she in town?" asked Vandeloup, eagerly. "Ay, and Seliny with her," answered Archie, fondling his frill. "She's varra rich now, as ye've no doubt heard. Ay, ay," he went on, "she's gotten a braw house down at St Kilda, and she's going to set up a carriage, ye ken." "She told me," pursued Mr McIntosh sourly, looking at Vandeloup, "if I saw ye, I was to be sure to tell ye to come and see her." "Present my compliments to Madame," said Vandeloup quickly, "and I will wait on her as soon as possible." "Losh save us, laddie," said McIntosh irritably, "you're as full of fine words as a play actor. Have you seen anything done in this pit o' Tophet of the bairn that rin away?" "Oh, Miss Marchurst," said Vandeloup smoothly, ready with a lie at once. "No, I'm sorry to say I've never set eyes on her." "The mistress is just daft about her," observed McIntosh querulously, "and she's going to look all through the town till she find the puir wee thing." "I hope she will," said M. Vandeloup, who devoutly hoped she wouldn't. "Will you come and have a glass of wine, Mr McIntosh?" "Till have a wee drap o' whisky if you've got it good," said McIntosh cautiously, "but I dinna care for thae wines, that's sour on a body's stomach." McIntosh having thus graciously assented, Vandeloup took him up to the club, and introduced him all round as the manager of the famous Pactolus. All the young men were wonderfully taken up with Archie and his plain speaking, and had Mr McIntosh desired, he could have drunk oceans of his favourite beverage. However, being a Scotchman and cautious, he took very little, and left Vandeloup to go down to Madame Midas at St Kilda, and bearing a message from the Frenchman that he would call there the next day. Archie having departed, Vandeloup got through the rest of the day as he best could. He met Mr. Wopples in the street, who told him how he had found Kitty, quite unaware that the young man before him was the villain who had betrayed the girl. Vandeloup was delighted to think that Kitty had not mentioned his name, and quite approved of Mr. Wopples' intention to take the girl on tour. Having thus arranged for Kitty's future, Gaston went along to his broker, and found that the astute Polglaze had got him his shares. "Going up," said Polglaze as he handed the scrip to Vandeloup and got a cheque in exchange. "Oh, indeed," said Vandeloup with a smile. "I suppose my two friends have begun their little game already," he thought, as he slipped the scrip into his breast pocket. "Information?" asked Polglaze as Vandeloup was going. "Oh, you like to know where I got it," said M. Vandeloup, amiably. "Very sorry I can't tell you, but you see, my dear sir, I am not a woman, and can keep a secret." Vandeloup walked out, and Polglaze looked after him with a puzzled look, then summed up his opinion in one word: sharp, incisive, and to the point. "Clever," said Polglaze, and put the cheque in his safe. Vandeloup strolled along the street thinking. "Bebe is out of my way," he thought with a smile. "I have a small fortune in my pocket," and he continued thoughtfully, "Madame Midas is in Melbourne." "I think now," said M. Vandeloup, with another smile, "that I have conquered the blind goddess." Chapter 2, Part 6.